The grandmother on the bench. There are moments in a courtroom that you never forget, not because of the gavel, not because of the verdict, but because of the silence just before it. I've been a judge for over 30 years. I've seen liars cry. I've seen innocent people stand tall. I've seen arrogance walk in wearing $1,000 shoes and walk out barefoot in shame. But the day a young woman looked me in the eye, smirked, and threatened my grandson on live television, that was a different kind of silence. That was the kind that changes people. And today, I want to tell you exactly what happened, because this story isn't really about me. It's about every grandmother who ever had to watch someone hurt their family and stay quiet. It's about every person who ever got bullied online and thought nobody's going to do anything about it. Somebody did something about it. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe kindness should still have a shield and cruelty should still have a cost, then subscribe. Because every week I sit down and I tell you the truth. No filters, no noise, just justice. Now let me take you back to where this all began. It started on a Tuesday morning, not in a courtroom, not with lawyers or evidence or camera lights. It started on a phone screen, the way so many things do these days. My grandson Adam had been a traffic officer for 4 years. Quiet young man, steady, the kind of person who still holds doors open for strangers and says yes ma'am without being told. He loved his job. He believed in it. He used to tell me, "Grandma, most people just need somebody to be fair with them." That Tuesday, he pulled over a silver convertible doing 61 in a 40 zone. Routine stop. He walked up to the window, polite as always, badge on his chest, ticket book in hand. The woman behind the wheel looked at his badge. Then she looked up at him, and she smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind of smile that tells you someone is already thinking about how to use you. "Shinglin," she said slowly, like she was tasting the word. "Any relation to that judge on TV?" Adam smiled back. "Yes, ma'am, she's my grandmother." He handed her the ticket. She snatched it, didn't say another word. He thought nothing of it. He'd heard jokes about our family name before. It came with the territory. He went back to his car, finished his shift, came home, and made himself a sandwich. He had no idea what was already loading on her phone. Her name was Celeste Verone, 34 years old, second-generation money. Her father had built a real estate business from the ground up, and Celeste had inherited every dollar and none of the humility that comes from earning it yourself. She had 2.5 million followers on social media. She called herself unfiltered. Her fans called her fearless. But what she really was, I'll tell you plainly, was someone who had never once been held accountable for anything she said or did. She'd filmed a grocery store employee having a panic attack and posted it for laughs. She'd run a small bakery owner out of business with one viral post because they'd asked her to wait in line like everyone else. She once live-streamed herself refusing to pay a contractor and called him dramatic when he got upset. Every single time her followers cheered, every single time, no one stopped her. That kind of unchecked power does something to a person. It makes them believe the rules were written for other people. By the time she got home from that traffic stop, she had already written the caption. She posted Adam's badge number, his photo, and underneath it, she wrote, "Meet Officer Adam Schindlin. Proof that privilege runs in the family. Guess Grandma taught him how to bully, too." 300,000 likes in an hour. Her followers flooded his department's page. They tagged me in memes. Someone wrote, "Tell Granny to retire before someone teaches her manners." Another post said things I won't repeat here, but they were about Adam's safety, his physical safety. Adam saw it that evening. He texted me a screenshot, one line underneath it. "Grandma, don't worry, she's just another troll." I sat with that message for a long time. I was in my kitchen. The city was quiet outside my window. My tea had gone cold. I read his words again, just another troll. I thought about every person who had ever been hurt by someone who got called just a troll. I thought about the bakery owner, the contractor, the grocery store employee, all the people no one stood up for because the crowd was too loud and the platform was too big and it was easier to scroll past. I typed back slowly, "No, Adam, she's a case." Now here's what most people don't know about how our show works. We don't manufacture drama. We don't script outcomes. When a real case comes across my desk that has legal grounds, harassment, defamation, credible threat, we pursue it the same way any court would. The cameras are there. The process is real. Celeste Verone had made a public threat against a law enforcement officer. She had posted his personal badge information online, which had led to targeted harassment. And later that night, she had sent Adam a private message. 3 words, "I'll ruin you." That message, small as it seemed, was the piece that mattered most because it showed intent. It showed that the public posts weren't careless. They were deliberate. She knew what she was doing. She wanted him to feel it. My producer didn't ask many questions when I reached out. He knew my voice when it meant something. Within 24 hours, Celeste Verone had been contacted by our legal team. They told her it was an episode about online responsibility, a chance to share her perspective. She said yes immediately. Of course she did. She thought it was another performance, another audience, another room full of people she could charm and dismiss. She had no idea what was waiting for her on that bench. The morning she walked in, I watched her from the side of the studio before the cameras went live. She was dressed in white, head to toe. Blazer, shoes, handbag, everything. Deliberately, almost defiantly, white. Her nails were painted to match her jewelry. She moved through the room like someone who expected people to move out of her way, and most of them did. She shook hands with no one. She smiled at the cameras. She sat down, crossed her legs, and opened her phone. I've been in courtrooms my whole life. I know what nervous looks like. Nervous bites its nails, bounces its knee, checks the door. What Celeste had wasn't nerves. It was performance. She was already writing the story in her head. The time I went on Judge Judy's show and showed everyone who I really am. She didn't know that I was already holding the ending. When I took my seat and the room settled, I looked at her directly. She held my gaze. Points for that, I suppose. Most people look away. I opened simply. Ms. Varon, you're here today because a complaint has been filed against you for harassment, public threat, and defamation against a uniformed officer. How do you respond? She gave a small, practiced laugh. With all due respect, Your Honor, I think the word harassment is a stretch. I shared my experience online. That's protected speech. My team manages most of my content, and sometimes things go live that I haven't personally reviewed. I can't monitor everything. The audience stirred, a quiet ripple of discomfort. I nodded slowly. So your position is that you weren't responsible for what was posted? Exactly, she smiled. I'm a public figure. I deal with misunderstandings like this constantly. I let one beat of silence pass. Then I reached for the small remote on my desk and pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. Tell your grandson to stay off my page, or I'll make sure he never walks again. The silence that followed was not like other silences. It was the kind that has weight, the kind you can feel on your skin. I watched her face. I watched the white drain out of it. I watched the smile try to stay and fail. For exactly 3 seconds, Celeste Verone had no idea what to do with herself. Then she made the worst decision of the morning. She smirked. It was small, barely there, but the cameras caught it, the audience caught it, and I caught it. I set the remote down gently. Was that your team as well, Miss Verone? No answer. That recording, I continued, was made on this property, on a verified line, and it is dated the evening after the traffic stop. Your voice has been confirmed by 3 independent audio analysts. You sent that message personally to my grandson, about his ability to walk. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered something. She shook him off. "I want to ask you something," I said. "And I want you to understand that I said this not in anger. I said it the way I would speak to anyone who had lost their way so completely they didn't even know they were lost. When you typed those words, what did you think would happen?" She blinked. It was the first real moment, the first crack in the performance. She started. "I was angry about a traffic ticket." Silence. "You threatened a young man's ability to walk," I said, "because he gave you a speeding ticket and happened to share a last name with someone you wanted to punish. Is that correct?" She looked down at the desk. The room was completely still. What happened next, I want to tell you carefully because it matters. I did not enjoy that moment. I know people expect me to. I know viewers at home were leaning forward, waiting for me to raise my voice, to cut her down, to give them the satisfaction of watching someone powerful get crushed. That's not what I felt. What I felt sitting there looking at this young woman in her white blazer with her mascara beginning to betray her was something closer to sadness. Not for her choices, for what her choices revealed. A life lived entirely without reflection. A life so consumed by image and reaction and performance that somewhere along the way she had stopped being a person and become a brand. And brands don't feel guilt. Brands don't lose sleep. Brands don't understand that words land on real people with real bones and real families who love them. She had said, "I'll make sure he never walks again," about a boy I watched take his first steps. So yes, there was sadness, but there was also clarity. I picked up the ruling sheet. "Ms. Varon, this court finds you guilty of targeted harassment, public defamation, and issuing a credible threat against a law enforcement officer." I heard a sharp breath from someone in the audience. "You are ordered to pay damages of $75,000 to the plaintiff. A formal restraining order will be filed, preventing you from contacting or referencing any member of this family in any public or private forum." Her hands were flat on the desk now, pressing down like she needed something to hold on to. "Additionally," I said, "and I want you to understand that this part was not revenge. This part was symmetry. You will record and post a formal public apology on your own platform, the same platform you used to target this officer. It will remain visible and unpinned for no less than 30 days. Your Honor." Her voice was thin now, stripped of its gloss. That will end my brand." I looked at her for a long moment. "Your brand," I said quietly, "ended the moment you decided another person's safety was content." The applause that came was not the loud, electric kind you hear at sports events. It was slower, deeper, the kind that comes from a room full of people who have all, at one point or another, wished someone would just say it. After the cameras stopped, after the audience filed out, and the crew began rolling up cables, I walked down from the bench. I don't usually do that. The bench is the bench. But that day I walked down, and I crossed the room to where Adam was sitting. He had his hands folded in his lap. He was looking at the floor. I sat beside him. Not beside him as a judge, as his grandmother. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. Then he shook his head. Then he nodded again, the way people do when the answer is too complicated for one word. "I kept thinking," he said softly, "that I did something wrong, that maybe I provoked her somehow, that if I'd just been more careful with my words at the stop." I put my hand over his. "Adam," I waited until he looked at me. "You issued a speeding citation. That's all you did. You were professional and courteous, and you went home and made a sandwich. What happened after that was entirely her doing." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he finally said, "but knowing and feeling are different things." "Yes," I told him, "they are. That's what makes you decent. The fact that you still question yourself, even when you're right. Don't lose that. But don't let it eat you either." He looked at the signed ruling in his hand. "Frame it," I told him, "not because you won, but because you stayed calm when someone tried to make you ugly. That's harder than any verdict." He laughed a little, small and quiet. Then he looked at me with those eyes he's had since he was 4 years old, wide and honest. And he said, "Grandma, weren't you angry?" I thought about it for a real moment, not for the camera, for him. "Yes," I said, "I was. But anger is a fire. You can cook with it, or you can burn the house down. I've spent 30 years learning which one actually helps." The fallout came fast. By the time Celeste left through the side exit, her inbox had turned. The same followers who had cheered her cruelty were now watching clips of her mascara running. The comment sections flipped overnight. Sponsors pulled out before her car reached the parking garage. 3 brand deals, gone within the hour. A 4th by midnight. She posted the apology 9 days later. I heard from people who watched it that she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Her voice was flat. The performance was gone. What was left underneath it was just a person who had run out of masks. I didn't watch it. I didn't need to. The story, though, kept moving on its own. Clips of the courtroom spread across every platform. The line that got quoted most wasn't the verdict. It was the simple question I'd asked before everything shifted. When you typed those words, what did you think would happen? People put it on posters. Law teachers used it in classrooms. Someone wrote to me and said their teenage daughter had quoted it to a classmate who was being cruel online. That letter meant more to me than any headline. Because that's the thing about justice. When it's done right, it doesn't just end a case. It starts a conversation. Adam hung the ruling in his office, right next to his academy certificate. Visitors would stop and read it sometimes, not because of the dollar amount, but because of what it represented. That you can be ordinary, that you can be a small name in a big city, and if someone comes for you sideways, there are still people in this world who will stand up and say, "No, that's not how this goes." People ask me sometimes what keeps me going, why I still sit on that bench after all these years, case after case, story after story. I always tell them the same thing, because every single day, someone walks into a room terrified that their voice doesn't matter, and every single day, I get the privilege of reminding them that it does. We live in a world that moves very fast. Trends come and go. Outrage rises and fades. People who behave terribly become famous, and people who deserve recognition go unnoticed. The internet makes cruelty easy and accountability rare, but I have never in 30 years seen the truth lose permanently. It gets delayed sometimes. It gets shouted down. It gets buried under noise and followers and money, but it always surfaces. Celeste Verone learned that, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because the moment she chose to aim her platform at a young man doing his job, at my family, she made a choice. And choices have weight, even the ones we make on a phone screen at breakfast. To everyone watching who has ever been on the receiving end of that kind of cruelty, who has ever had someone use their platform to make you small, who has ever been laughed at and dismissed and told you're being dramatic, I want you to hear this clearly. You were not being dramatic. What happened to you was real. Your dignity was real. Your hurt was real. And somewhere in a courtroom or a classroom or a kitchen table conversation, someone is standing up for you. The world is full of people who still believe that decency matters, who still believe that how you treat others says everything about who you are. Don't let the loudest voices convince you otherwise. The city lights were bright the night after the verdict. I stood at my window with a fresh cup of tea, the kind that actually stayed warm this time. And I thought about Adam, about his calm, about the way he'd said, "She's just noise," and meant it. He was right, of course. In the end, that's what cruelty is. Noise. The question is whether we let it drown out everything else. I've made my choice. Every day I put on that robe, I'm making it again. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a signed document handed quietly to a young man who did nothing wrong. Sometimes it's a question asked in a still room that makes someone finally reckon with what they've done. Sometimes it's just a grandmother who refuses to look away. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you've lived through, share it, pass it on. Because the world doesn't change from the top down. It changes one quiet act of courage at a time. And I'll be right here every week to remind you of that.